the first thing I'm sure you're going to want to know is how the project came about. How, because I know that Jen lives in America and Camilla lives in England, and how they came together to make this film, and then also what you were sort of hoping that the film would provoke, or what the film would do.
Yeah, I mean, I think really, we've been starting to ask ourselves a lot of questions about the filmmaking process. Both Jen and I came from kind of different angles. Jen had been an editor in the industry for almost 2 decades, and I'd come to documentary from journalism, from print journalism. So I really saw this kind of different world compared to print journalism, where there was these very clear kind of editorial guidelines of how you interact with sources. And I went into independent documentary filmmaking, and in some ways it felt like the Wild West. It was like, as long as you could raise money, you could make a film, and you might even get into a film festival, and nobody may have even fact-checked or done anything to kind of ensure the integrity of your film. So I found that kind of pretty terrifying. And, we've been talking about this idea and asking ourselves these questions. And literally at that moment, I get an email in my inbox, and a mutual friend of ours basically said, oh, Margie's in LA, and she'd love to sit and have a coffee with you to talk about working in documentaries. So Margie agreed to meet for a coffee, and we sat. And I said, Margie, I know you're thinking of working in documentaries. What do you think about this idea of subject? Essentially, we always knew that word was at the center of what we wanted to make. We wanted to kind of challenge that word. And Margie's response was just so powerful, and really kind of made it clear from the beginning that this was something that, was worth interrogating, that we really had to kind of try to get to the bottom of some of these issues that we were kind of facing in our industry. And in terms of our hopes, maybe, Jen could talk a little.
I mean, we really wanted to bring to light the conversations that were already happening behind closed doors. These aren't new things. You have Gordon Quinn from Cartemquin, who had started the conversation about documentary ethics decades ago. Pat Offer-Heidi, Sonia Childress, all these people who have spent basically a lifetime looking into this and really became our partners in making subject. And I think it was just one of those times where everything came together, and we're at a place and a time in society where we're talking about this stuff. Now we have the vernacular, the vocabulary. We can talk about consent, really what that means, mental health, all these things. So it was a perfect storm in a very good way. Our hopes and dreams were to start a conversation. This is not an expose or a checklist. It's just, how do we hold ourselves accountable at every step of the process and make sure that we aren't doing more harm than good in making these films?
I think that I'm sure people agree that what comes out of the film, there's lots of sort of conversation starters, that nobody sort of says something that's definitive. So, you get one contributor saying film should only be made in the communities by the people in the communities. And then you get somebody else saying, it's not who you are, it's how you do it. So I kept, every time that somebody would say something, and then I've been thinking about it a lot since. And then with Mukunda, this woman says, I don't think that was the best intervention that there could have been. And I read a little bit about it, because I got so intrigued by it. And apparently he went out in a mask. In New York, he went out in the streets in a mask and got picked up. And social services went to the family. And they said, it's bizarre parenting choices, but not illegal. So they wouldn't do anything about it. So in hindsight, when I thought about the film, and when he talks about how the film coincided with them starting to go out, and that it seemed like quite a good thing for that family, that it was part of them being back in the world. And the mother saying, it was the beginning of me getting away from Carlos. And I just wondered which of those, what you thought she meant, the woman that said, it's not an ideal intervention. There should have been a different intervention.
I think you just nailed it. And in the fact that there is no one size fits all.
Right.
And one of my favorite lines in Subject is Michelle Stevenson saying, it's about being deliberate at every step of the process. And every situation is going to be completely different. Every documentary is completely different. You have expose to docutainment, all the way to these social impact films. There's just an accountability as filmmakers that you have to make the decision of what makes the most sense for you and your participant, and hopefully that's informed. I think if you talk to Mukunda and Suzanne, their experience is going to be much different than the brothers. And we know this because when we were making Subject, we were very aware. We were like, well, how do your brothers feel about this? They're like, we don't want to be part of Subject. We don't want to be part of any documentaries. Whereas Mukunda and Suzanne were very open, and
Right.
you know,
I mean,
Suzanne.
look at him. He's
Exactly. He's just like
He's
for,
cool.
for them.
Yeah.
So there is no one size fits all when it comes to not only documentary filmmaking, but also what's best for each participant in the film.
Which sort of brings us to Marnie, quite, and which is, you were saying it was a horrible experience and you just wanted it to end being in Staircase. And I felt that you were sort of in the film because of your father, that you wanted to help your father, and it wasn't your decision. And in a way, what seems to come out of this film is it's actually all to do with power. So do you feel that in being in this film, you've sort of taken some of the power back from yourself? Or do you feel that it's kind of prolonging your story in a way, inadvertently, even though you're taking the power back? It seems such a contradictory thing, such an interesting, almost like a fluid thing.
Yes, I have many conversations with my therapist about this, actually. And it's when we started making Subject, I said, well, we can go film me and Joshua Tree climbing because we can use that as a teaser and maybe get some funding and get other participants involved. But I do not want to be in front of the cameras. I just want to produce and consult. And then as I got to know Jen and Camilla and their filmmaking practices, and we had so many discussions about what's the right thing to do and getting to know the other participants, I started to loosen up those boundaries around that and say, wait a second, I think specifically when my dad said yes to Dr. Phil, I was kind of pissed and said, you know
You
what?
were drunk or you were pissed off?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was
Angry.
probably both, honestly. And so I said, hey, okay, maybe let's go film Dr. Phil, and maybe this is something that does pertain to the larger story. So it was really, they let me kind of drive my own consent and my own story in a way that I had never experienced before.
So has it sort of laid something to rest, do you think? Do you think it's made you feel better about the past in a way? Has it exorcised something, or?
I think I was hoping to get some catharsis, and I don't think that's exactly what happened because I'm still traumatized by everything that happened in the Staircase events.
And it's still going, isn't it? Because they're making a feature film.
Yeah, because they did the HBO Max series. Yeah, but it's more meeting the other participants in our film and other further documentary participants. That's, I think, where the healing starts, because you get out of that. My family's the only one who knows what this feels like feeling, and you go, oh, this is more universal, and maybe we can make some changes.
One of the other things that came up in the film, which I was intrigued by, is this idea that people in films should be paid, in documentary films. And I was totally adoring of Arthur and his story of his mum coming to the door without her teeth. And he just seemed so relaxed and fabulous. And how the film had actually changed his life and his family's life, because they put the money from the film back into the participants' life. And I thought that was fantastic. Do you think what do you feel about this whole idea of paying people? Because I've struggled with that, really, because I think if you pay people at the beginning, then they're sort of they're actors for you, and they'll be wanting to please you. So that feels like a really wrong thing to do to me. So what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think with independent film, it's not too difficult to find a solution, in the sense that, like with Arthur's situation, you can give participants a share of the profit, so that, like, if everyone's making money, then they're a part of that. But if no one's making money, they're not. So it's kind of like you're part of this team, the broader team as a whole. And if we benefit financially in a significant way, then you're also going to benefit. I think that's quite different to like a flat fee up front or paying somebody every time you're shooting. But I have also seen that in documentaries, whether it's just one set interview fee. A lot of experts charge for interviews. So I think what we're kind of asking the question about is, these rules are kind of being broken all the time for different types of people. So where does that leave people who have gone through trauma? So if you have an agent or a lawyer, you're probably going to get paid to be in a documentary. But if you're just a kind of a normal person, then those rules don't apply to you. So the rules are already being broken, and we just need to kind of be talking about it so that we can find a new path through all of this.
I think the key is somewhere around the idea of power, and about how much power you have over your own story, really.
Such a good question. I mean, in a perfect world, yes. I mean, it's their story. I mean, absolutely. I don't, again, we're going up against the man, corporations. How do we force them? I mean, a lot of times in these corporations, they're not even asking for permission to make the films necessarily anyway. So, I mean, I think I would love that, but I just don't see a very clear path forward.
I think there are ample opportunities for films like this, especially because every time that they get a new deal, I mean, with The Staircase, it was it was supposed to be with HBO, and then it was with Sundance Channel. It just, and then HBO Max and all these different things. At some step of the way, they could have said, wait a second, what about the family? What about this poor traumatized family? Well, maybe we didn't do it at the beginning, but Hoop Dreams, later on, you can still somehow find a conscience and figure out how to get people financial compensation for their time and their trauma.
I think it's important to talk about it now, because there's just been this commoditization of story that has never been at this level that we've seen in the past with, the rise of the streamers. I mean, there is a commoditization of people's stories, and but these are real people. So how do they fit into that equation? Or, do they deserve a place at the table? I think that's the kind of the why now of the film, is that there's a lot of money being made now.
Well, a few of us are actually starting a nonprofit for documentary participants, so people who have been participants in the past or present or future. And really what we're centering the nonprofit around is legal, so for consent, really having legal support, as well as mental health and advocacy and mediation, and really just counseling and advising. So many people who have already been in documentaries can really help guide people in the, who are going through this right now, or maybe are thinking about being in film. So there's so many different ways that participants need more support. And so I'm hoping with the nonprofit that we can start to have those conversations.
What kind of things would you advise if for somebody who came to you and said, I'm about to be in a film? What kind of counsel would you give them? Because it's something more concrete.
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on the reasons why they want to be in the documentary in the first place. So I would never just say, no, don't do it. I've had a horrible experience. I'm also a documentary filmmaker, so I'm not interested in that. It's more saying, okay, well, here, let me walk you through the process of what it's like for a lot of people who have been in documentaries. And how does your family feel? And what are you hoping to get out of this? And what happens if the film doesn't take off or doesn't make money? And what kind of conversations would you like to have with the filmmakers that maybe you need some help figuring out how to bring that up?
Do all three of you think that a documentary, being in a film, can be empowering for people as well? Because I think that came through from Arthur very much, that some people really love having their stories told, that they want the story told.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we made the film.
Right.
And we say it a lot, but this is a love story to our industry. It's all the films that changed our lives and films that we love so much. And we just, we want to make sure that I don't think anyone gets into documentary filmmaking thinking that they're not making a difference, or even worse, not doing more good than bad, or re-traumatizing their participants. So how do we minimize that and I think that we can only do that with resources and support and conversations.
I mean, in that, I think in your, I mean, change has to come from the top, right? I mean, that's, that's a production company probably with a big, under pressure to come up with stories to pitch them and to make money out of them and to kind of have that fall on junior people, associate producers in the team. It's just, it's not really appropriate. So yeah, I think we can only start again by just like talking about this, so that the more people talk about it, the more they're not going to be the ones that are going to send somebody out to kind of to do that. But I'm really glad you raised that, because I think that's something that hasn't really come up that much, because especially within when you're working for TV or broadcast, yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff gets landed on junior people, and you're just trying to survive in the industry. You're just trying to do your job and kind of move forward, and you don't necessarily have the power to raise a concern about something. But I encourage you to raise a concern and to put it in writing. And
You
if
might
that,
be surprised.
you might have to not work for that
Yeah.
company if it's
Yeah.
if they're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of Subject, I had an amazing opportunity to direct a 3-part series for HBO, where I was actually able to come to HBO with line items for mental health, with the idea of a consent calendar, with the idea of amended releases. But I had this proven track record. I had the language to express myself, and I had found my allies. I do think that there are allies within the industry. But again, just the language and the conversation, you might be pleasantly surprised. Camille and I had a meeting with a company, because we also have Lady and Bird, and out of the gate, the guy was like, "We just go straight for the life rights, blah, blah, blah." And Camille and I were like, "Oh, he obviously didn't watch any of our work." But it was really that moment where it was like, this is probably, and a great company, but probably not a right match for us. And that's something that, we're trying to find our way through as we start the new company and pick our projects. But then found these amazing executives at HBO that were like, "Let's do this." So, it's just give it a go, Both. I mean, so, we obviously had, a lot of the films that are featured happen to be friends of ours or people that we know. But yeah, we did go ahead and go forward with fair use as well. I think our entire budget was about $600,000. So it's not like, we had the legal capacity or the, not like just the lawyer's fees, but also the fee to pay every studio. So when you're making a film like this, fair use is extremely important. But we were very, very, every film was painstakingly picked and chosen, and hopefully, we haven't offended anybody.
I mean, again, Jen mentions it's a kind of a love letter to our industry. I mean, these are films that we had loved or had moved us, we felt were just iconic in the documentary landscape. But it really came down to just individual choice. Like, which films do we want to spend, the next 5 years looking at and kind of getting to know the participants. So we didn't really go in, we went in very open-minded. Like, we definitely knew that we didn't want a kind of a film where everybody had the same experience. I think it was like a patchwork of films where, we wanted an international documentary. We wanted to touch on true crime. We wanted to, show a mix of experiences. So I don't think we had all the answers at the beginning. But we definitely were very deliberate about the films that we chose, because it kind of came from a place of love for those films, essentially. I don't know. I have this thing with documentaries where, like, I have an idea and then something weird from the universe happens, and like getting the email from Margie just like was that thing at that exact moment. And like that's really what happened. It was just like, we have to make this.
It was 5 days before Netflix was going to release The Staircase in over 200 countries. So when Camilla and I met, I was like, "Oh, by the way, Netflix," and it was
Without the family's consent. It's going to go into
Yeah, just sometimes there's just the moment, yeah, it's a moment in the universe and an idea, and they come together, and then that's just, you just have to keep moving forward. I think if I'd met Margie and she said that is a terrible idea, definitely
Yeah.
don't bother. Like, it wouldn't have been one of those moments from the universe.
But this was definitely something that was just on Camille and I, like, weighing very heavily. And being an editor as long as I was, I found myself making these really intense decisions that could affect people's entire lives, or affected a community, without ever knowing what they really wanted from the film. And the better I did my job as a storyteller, the more that it could possibly affect these people. And that started just really, like, 15 years into it, I'm just like, I can't. And that's when I started producing, so I could meet people and find out what their hopes and dreams were, and actually have some sort of partnership throughout the process. But yeah, that's kind of a heavy burden to carry.
And I think even just, I've made quite a few films at this point, and I have had some really difficult relationships with participants, and I've seen them struggle. And I think, there was really a feeling of just, I want to understand how this can be healthier, because I've definitely found myself in situations where it was not healthy and it was very upsetting and toxic, I think probably for both people. And I knew so many filmmakers that also had that experience. So it was like, okay, let's just stop and listen and try to understand how we can change our behavior to make this better for us and for participants.
They all were people that we originally wanted to explore, I guess. Yeah. And then it was really the help of Margie to, facilitate that meeting, and ultimately facilitate this conversation to make sure that it's what they wanted as well.
I mean, Jesse still says that when we're in Q&As
Yeah,
together, that he says Margie's the reason why I'm here. If Margie had said no, maybe don't do this, he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I think
They had a very shared experience. But I do think that now they're this mini little powerhouse family, and they couldn't be more different, but it's that shared experience of being on camera and having this collective, voice that have really brought them together.